Welcome to Dare, the show for startup leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs who dare to shape the future. Dare is brought to you by the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network, OEN, and Darwaft, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. The Dare Show is excited to welcome Nahed Khairallah to the show. He's the leader of Organized Chaos, and he has an interesting background in HR to share with us. So, Nahed, take it away.
Hey, no, thanks for having me. So yeah, I've been in the HR space for I think coming up on like almost 15 years now. I got into HR like a lot of HR folks I know kind of by mistake, stumbled into it really off of an experience I had working in sales at a tech company
Aha.
and a company that was small with around 100 employees, growing pretty quickly, triple digit growth year over year, which happened to crash and burn to the ground.
Oh,
Um,
so not good.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, not good, and the more I looked into it, it was really mostly people-related decisions that led
Mhm.
to it, and, that sort of got me interested into the HR space, and I started just self-learning a lot of it as I was, doing other work at the time, part-time, full-time, and so forth, and then I decided to start doing pro bono volunteer work and really started working with a lot of startups in the startup ecosystem and so forth, and that's how I gained traction into HR, and
Yeah.
started my consulting firm in 2011 and went on to work with more than 150 companies over my career in terms of helping them really scale from that seven figure to nine figure mark.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then organized chaos came to be as sort of a my attempt to help a lot of entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs learn sort of the shortcuts to proper people practices and how to really not go through what I went through with my first job where a company was doing so well on the product market fit and financials, but the people stuff was not going well, and they ended up failing for that reason. So that's kind of what I'm trying
Right.
to do here.
Yeah. Well, your tagline is that you turn HR into rocket fuel for growth for
Yes.
startups.
Yes.
And that's a great tagline. I want to drill into that. But before that, I want to go back to the fact that early on, you saw something fail and that taught you a lot. And I've always believed that you learn more from your experiences that fail than you do from the ones that are successful. So tell us what you learned from that experience.
No, definitely. I mean, that experience showed me really, and the funny part is that I only spent 6 months in that company, right?
Mm.
But within those 6 months, and someone who was really still really fresh in their career, I saw a lot of things which, in hindsight, look pretty off from a leadership perspective.
Yeah.
Little to no delegation at all for a 100-person company. A lot of funneling into specific leadership positions to make all kinds of decisions from top to bottom. Very little trust in each other's capabilities, always doubting each other, having separate agendas as departments, not functioning like a single unit. It feels like
Mm.
every department's beating to the beat of their own drum. And
I'm sure that nobody out there running a company has ever seen this kind of behavior
of
before.
course. Right? Very typical stuff.
Right, right.
But also, I saw a lot of the employees over there, which were sort of highlighting a lot of the issues that were going on, and they were falling on deaf ears. And leadership just not really refusing to work with their teams to get to solutions and so forth. And not treating employees really as partners and stakeholders, but as people who are just told what to do and they sort of need to just take their marching orders and go. So those were some of the main dynamics I saw from that experience, which told me like, hey, it's obvious that that's probably not the right way to go because if you have good product market fit, you're a growing company, you have triple digit growth, and you still happen to fail. Well, what is it?
Right.
And that was really the thing that stood out.
Fascinating. So what stood out was these bad management practices. And how do you counteract those kind of tendencies to micromanage with better practices?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think first and foremost, especially from the people function is often viewed as the support function, which for most folks, does payroll, benefits, recruitment, development, some of the stuff that is associated with a back office support function. One of the most important things I found, which have been successful over the years in working with startups and small companies, is that the HR function has to be integrated in the business completely, meaning whoever's leading that function and whoever's handling HR has to understand the business at least as well as all the other leaders in the operation. Because the only way you can influence behavior, the only way you can influence change is if you gain the trust and respect of all the other leadership team And how you do that is by showing that you understand the operation and you're able to link every single initiative and activity from the HR perspective into benefit for the organization, be it on
Mm.
a revenue perspective, on a growth perspective, on some of these initiatives. So generally speaking, the way to counteract that, which I found very beneficial, is to be very specific into the cost benefit of anything which needs to happen from an HR perspective. Well, okay,
Mhm.
give you a small example here. Let's say that you are experiencing some attrition within a specific department, right? Due to bad management practices. Well, if you do some really quick back of the napkin math, just by looking at some historical data on salaries, recruitment costs, and so forth, you can sort of get a pretty good estimate in terms of, hey, what is the cost that we're incurring here to replace and always backfill this attrition versus the expense that it would take to actually either train and develop that individual who's leading that team, or maybe replace that individual or upskill them or change their role to where they counteract what they're doing and how it doesn't take that much
Mm.
of a bad impact. So I think it's always important to show what the benefit is to the business. Otherwise, the business is going to be a little bit apprehensive to moving in a direction where they don't see the exact ROI or the benefit really from a company perspective as opposed to the little department or HR perspective.
Right, right. Everything you're saying fits into kind of this new model that I've read about where companies, especially startups, are dealing with the world of VUCA. Are you familiar with that kind of acronym, VUCA?
Not really. Not really.
So it stands for volatility, V,
Mhm.
uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
Yeah,
And you can counter those with a different VUCA, which is vision, understanding, clarity, and agility, right? So the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, that's the world of the startup, right? Some people even
definitely.
I think the Harvard Business Review said that complexity should be chaos because when you're in a startup, it's chaotic, it's ambiguous, it's uncertain, it's volatile, right?
It
So
is.
you need to be able to take action there, and micromanaging your people is not going to get you to that sense of clarity and agility that you need.
No, agreed. Yeah, definitely. The VUCA makes sense.
Yeah, so what specific things do you bring to a company when you come in? Like, we know what the end goal is, you know where you want to go. Are you training people? Are you working with executives? What do you and your company, Organized Chaos, actually provide?
Yeah, so the most important thing, and a lot of people look in amazement when I tell them that, but the first course of action for us is generally not HR.
Mm,
It's looking at the entire operation and assessing. And of course, to preface this, generally I work with companies that are in growth mode, in scaling mode. So companies that are actually they have all the building blocks to actually scale financially, product fit wise, but they need the engine to get them there.
mm,
So basically, we audit the organization from that lens, meaning, hey, based on where you want to go as a company, based on your revenue goals, based on your growth projections, and so on and so forth, is your company set up today in a way to actually enable that growth, or is it going to hinder that growth?
mm,
And the reason I'm saying we don't look at it from an HR standpoint in the beginning is because when you audit an operation, how it's put together, from its processes to how the structure is built, to who are the people leading the organization, some of the practices existing in the organization, a lot of issues related to scaling or lack thereof are mostly process and systems issues rather than throwing people at the problem. So for typically me, the first thing I look at is, do you have the infrastructure in place as a business, as an operating model to
mm,
sustain whatever it is you're trying to do? That is the first thing we look at. Now, once that is looked at and we identify, okay, what are the things that are great that we need to keep double down on versus the things that we maybe need to pivot on or just scrap completely and move in another direction, we lay out the plan for what those look like. But then we start talking about, okay, who are the people that we need to really make that engine run? It's like having a race car, but no driver to drive it, right?
Sorry, just to back up a second. When you say things, do you mean like practices or do you mean like policies or what kind of things are we talking about here?
We're talking about all of it. We're talking about
Okay.
practices, we're talking about policies, we're talking about unwritten rules and cultural norms. We're
Mhm,
talking about leadership behaviors. We're talking about a lot of things here, especially in the beginning phase, understanding how the company operates, especially from a process and system perspective. And the way I'll try to simplify it is walk me through the steps you take to deliver value, be it to your customer externally or any customers internally. Because at the end of the day,
yeah.
if you're an organization that wants to grow and scale, It's really about, okay, how are you delivering value and what's the outcome at the end? So that's kind of the lens we look at for the most part. And then the HR part fits in to complement, okay, how do we achieve all those things from the HR perspective, be it org structure, be it job design, be it specific behaviors, process, policies, and so forth.
Got it. And so you spend time with the executives and with the team, understanding the dynamics of what's happening. And first of all, kind of creating that kind of ground truth, and then understanding how to optimize those systems, right?
Yes, 100%.
And so when you come in and after you've understood what's there and you have some proposals for how to optimize, how to improve things, how do people receive this? Because sometimes I imagine, you're kind of upsetting the apple cart. Like we've always done it that way. That's a classic phrase, right? So how do you evangelize the ideas that you have and the expertise that you have and ensure that a company can grab onto them to be successful?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very common situation that any external, consultant or service provider runs into, right? Mm,
Yeah,
I
I guess from my perspective, I feel like HR feels kind of more personal in a
yes.
way. But yes, you're right. Anybody's going to run into this. But I'm curious, how are you successful there?
No, definitely. And I think it's great that you said HR is personal because a lot of
Yeah,
times HR is associated with the fluffy side of business. That side of business which you really can't you put your finger on.
yeah,
And that's really the main reason why I started with we don't dive into HR in the beginning. For me,
yeah.
if you want to make it with executives and you want to really get something done, actually get them to accept some sort of change, it needs to be crystal clear from their lens based on the things they're interested in and the metrics they're looking at. It has to make sense on that level. So
Uh,
if I say that I want to change a certain process or introduce a certain program or initiative, then I need to make a very solid business case as to why something I'm doing in HR or in operation or so forth is something which is going to help whatever success metric that the leadership team is actually focused on. And that could be
mhm,
different from company to company, right? There are some companies that, for example, are not venture backed, and less than 1% of companies are VC backed.
right.
So let's say a company that's bootstrapping is more interested in, okay, how do I increase my profit margin as I grow, as opposed to a company maybe which is VC backed that is not so much interested in profit right now. They're more interested in growth in terms of revenue and customer acquisition. So that kind of information for me when talking to executives gives me a very solid idea as to, okay, any initiative program that needs to run has to feed those end business goals in mind, so the programs are typically built around achieving those goals. And the way typically we get the least amount of resistance is when we show a very clear path between how does initiative A impact metric B that you have and show the clear line there with the data and how it works. And the way I approach things, it's a very data driven kind of operation. Because especially again, when you're dealing with business leaders and executives, you need to
Mm.
put yourselves in their shoes. What are they eyeing? What are they interested in? Although the benefits that you provide can be more than those top level, top of the line business metrics and so forth, there's a lot of things that have a domino effect, and there's relationships with cause and effect and so forth. But that's kind of the top level approach of how we go about these things to really get things across the line and just pitch them something from their lens and what they're interested in.
Right. So, not to reveal any client secrets, but I can imagine some scenarios that might be something like, it takes 5 days to get something shipped because you have to check with four different people. So, if we could reduce that to just like give that guy autonomy to ship the thing when he thinks it's ready, you've just saved your customer 3.5 days. Or by the same token, if you have a system that requires only this one person to sign off, and when they're out of the building, everything grinds to a halt, you're wasting time and money. I mean, are these examples? I see you nodding, but our podcast
Yes.
audience can't see that.
Yeah, no, no,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, those are spot on examples. I mean, I
good,
can give you an example. I can give you actually a couple of examples that are relevant to that.
great.
One of them is this was a couple of years ago. I was working with a manufacturing company who manufactures PC peripherals. They had an approval process for specific HR hiring issues. It went through 3 to 4 people. And when we dug down and dug deep, typically when you're looking at someone who's providing approval, their input has to be an added value to the others that are approving, right? So if people are looking at the same thing all the time, if you have 3 people from finance looking at something and they're using the same data and the same decision making points, that's you're just building redundancy there. So there was some redundancy happening across that, and it was actually delaying their hiring. It was delaying their entire processes, and it was actually causing them to scale back production because they couldn't get people in fast enough to do that. So that was one example of just taking away just a few approvals, sped up the recruitment and time to fill from the time they opened a job for hiring to the time they got approvals by around 20%. Just a little example like that. Another example that I ran into, which was a bit more major, this was also around probably 3 years ago as well, is I was working with a company in the SaaS space and B2B SaaS. And I was actually attending one of their executive leadership meetings, and the team was presenting a strategy for how they're going to be shipping 6 new products that year and the timelines for them and the product roadmap. So in my role, I typically also look at the company's financials and everything because I need to tie everything together. So I raised
Hmm.
my hand up and I said, guys, if you try to launch these 6 products, you either have to go, lend money. Sorry, you need to borrow money, or you're going to go
Hmm.
bankrupt because what I'm seeing here doesn't add up. And then once we started talking a bit more, I had linked the time to market from when a concept is approved to the time it's developed to the
Hmm.
testing to the release and the marketing and the time it takes for customer acquisition, and really linked all that together with data and showed that based on the numbers you guys have and what you're doing, something's off here. If you want to release 6 products and so forth, we need to make some adjustments in these high cost areas and these low efficiency areas to hit that goal, or you need to scale back the goal. So
Hmm.
that's not a typical HR thing you would think of, right?
Right,
But
right.
it ties a lot of the HR data, like how much are you paying for resources, how much, our salaries, bonus, all these different things, and you tie them to business operational data, you get a full picture that not many other counterparts in the organization get to see and able to add value in that way.
Fantastic. So you're able to see comprehensively, holistically, how the organization is working and encourage it to become better. I do want to think about people for a second, and I'll touch on something a little complicated here, or at least it's become complicated, it didn't used to be,
Mhm.
which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And
I
I'll
knew you were going there.
well, yeah. So I'll preface this by pointing out that the whole goal of acknowledging that diversity exists and that equity should be a thing and that inclusion is what we're aiming at is a merit-based system where the it's supposed to level the playing field so that all the people with the actual qualifications can get a job interview. It's not about lowering the bar at all. It's
Mhm.
about making sure that people of all backgrounds have equal access to be able to show their merits, their education, and their capabilities.
That's
So,
right.
with that in mind, how do you deal with DEI now, especially with the changed world of, Trumpism, frankly?
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that question. And my short answer to this is my approach to DI has never changed and never will change. And let me explain why. I approach it from the lens of this is the way DI has been handled. I have a bit of an issue with when you look at the corporate world.
Mhm.
I think DEI, part of what's happening today is the fault of a lot of companies and how they've handled the situation. DEI became a publicity stunt for a lot of companies, unfortunately. It
Yeah,
became a situation.
it wasn't real. Yeah.
No, it wasn't real. It was more about PR. It was more about getting eyeballs on, hey, look at what we're doing. And especially with instances like the George Floyd murder and others, is whenever there's any type of social instance or public instance of outrage which happens along DEI, you see companies over index on the publicity part, but they go and hire DI, they create DI positions, they hire DI folks and so forth. But then if you look internally, like Microsoft was a good example in the news last year where they were chopping down some of the DEI workforce and they had employees go on record to the news and say, hey, this was all a sham. We were actually never doing anything. And we had instances of actual discrimination, which we never did anything about. My approach to DEI is always it starts with mindset and culture and building a framework for enforcing it. It's not if you leave it up to individual people without a solid framework to manage it, it's always going to go sideways. What I mean by that, and this is something you touched upon, Ed, which is very important. First off, when it comes, the first instance of where DEI is in play is the hiring piece, right?
Mm.
It is that first contact. How are you providing people the same opportunity? Are you leveling the playing field where everyone has the same, pretty much same chances of getting in based on their qualifications and so forth?
Right, right, the same access. It's not like somebody's
Exactly.
brother or somebody's cousin or somebody's, like, sister-in-law. Instead, it's like, let's make sure that people who are applying actually have merits.
Exactly. There's a lot of things that go into that, but it starts with how you design jobs. Like, give you a small example. There's some companies traditionally who would choose to hire from very specific schools only, right? Schools which
Harvard,
might,
Yale, yeah,
yes,
whatever.
right? Now, some of those schools have a very high diversity ratio, but there are some other cases where it's skewed in one way or
Yeah,
another, right? So you're already sort of discounting a portion of the population just because of those choices you're making. Although there's data that shows things like that sometimes don't really make a difference, or GPA and other things of that sort. So the hiring framework has to be put into place where how you design a job is keeping in mind nothing related to any forms of direct or indirect discrimination are touched upon. Interviewing is very important, and how you make decisions on candidates. A lot of times, unfortunately, interviewing is not an exact science. It's a very subjective based approach. As much as you try to make it objective, there's subjectivity there. So
right,
there,
right. People say, "I like that guy. I didn't like that guy."
exactly,
It
exactly.
becomes
So
subjective. Yeah,
right, so you need to infuse objective measures in there, right? Like skill testing, right? Give them a paid project to work on, see how the outcome comes in, so on and so forth. When people are in the organization as well, you need to build job leveling, salary structures, and so forth that take into account job specific and performance specific issues. And you need to have flags to be able to identify if anything along those lines is not taking place so you can immediately identify it. DEI has to be an ingrained part of your day-to-day life. It is not a separate program. It is not something you just put on your web on your careers page. And I'm someone who actually doesn't think it has to be a separate job function in a company. Because if you're telling me you need a DEI function to make the company, right, actually live DEI, you're starting off on the wrong foot. If the
right.
company's
It's kind
DNA
of like
isn't
a
that way.
company. Yeah, it's kind of like a company saying we are customer focused. Well, if you aren't customer focused, how the heck are you making money? You know, it's the same.
Exactly.
It's the same with your people. Like if you aren't actually caring about the fact that you have a workforce who is qualified and a workforce who had equal opportunity to apply for the job and were hired based on their merits, not because they knew somebody's brother-in-law, then you aren't really hiring the best people.
Yeah, exactly. And the last thing I'll say about DEI specifically is DEI, for it to work and to be done properly, you don't need to have a problem come up or an issue come up or an employee come and complain for you to actually do something. It has to be ingrained in your operation. For example, you do some analysis on, let's say, our salaries per job. Do we have any disparities that are, touching any protected classes that are observable to us, which might have happened unconsciously, right? It's not
Yeah.
always deliberate, but hey,
And
okay,
people
then
aren't always trying to be dumb about this. They just don't know.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But the important thing is that once you do know, is to actually take action to fix it and to be transparent about it
Mm.
and to show exactly where you were and where you are today. So there needs to be action that follows that. So that's really how you need to focus on it. But yeah, if the focus is on, making sure that we have the visibility, or like I've heard sometimes things from hiring managers such as, I want to have a person of color in that role or a female in that role because it's better for the company. It's better for the board. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like that is
Yeah,
that is not DI. That is you just trying to, be a pleaser and try to portray something you're not. It's not genuine. And that actually is a form of discrimination as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's a form of discrimination, just the same way as if I said, I just want guys who look like me in the role.
Correct. Yes,
It,
definitely.
it's discrimination either way. The interesting thing is that I think corporations now are faced with the challenge in the current political environment of doing what's best for their customers or their business or doing what's best politically. And I think those two are very opposed right now because you can do what's best politically and it might really screw over your workforce and your customers and your revenues. So it's a tricky time. And I wish you all the best with your work helping companies to improve.
No, thank
And
you.
yeah, as we come to the end of our time, I wanted to ask you, what do you dare to dream?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I take this back to the reason why I started Organized Chaos. And again, a lot of people discover who I am from the podcast
Mhm.
itself. And what I dream really is for every founder to have success if they have a good product market fit and they have a great idea that should be successful, and them not have people problems that fail their companies, because
Mm.
around 20 to 25% of businesses fail because of people problems. That is not a small
Wow,
number. That is
that's
not a
not a
small
small
number.
number at all. Yeah.
at all. So yeah, I dare to dream that we live in a world where, which kind of puts me out of job in a way, but it's where startup founders can realize their dreams and do so without shooting themselves in the foot because all the people decisions are decisions that you have control over. They're not market dynamics that you can't control. They're not competitors that you can't control. These are things you can fully control from A to Z. So why
Yeah.
screw up on the stuff we can control? That's really how what I dare to dream is that all the people stuff we can control, we get right, and we actually see more successful businesses, more economic growth, and more opportunities, and more people achieving what they want.
Great. Well, thanks for your time today,
No, this was a
Nahid.
pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you, Nahid, and I wish you all the best. Thanks to our guests today for their insights into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We wish you all the best in your startup journey. The Dare Show is brought to you by the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network and by Darwaf, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. Visit us at oen.org or at darwaf.io. Thanks again for listening. Till next time.